The clock above the bar showed 9:30, but it felt like midnight to Maya. She had been on her feet for 12 hours straight, serving drinks and clearing tables at the Crossroads Tavern. The small border town had seen better days, and so had the tavern. The once bright paint on the walls had faded to a dull yellow, and several of the wooden chairs wobbled when customers sat down. But it was home, and it was honest work. Maya wiped down the sticky bar counter with a worn cloth, her movements automatic after years of the same routine. The tavern was nearly empty now, just a few regulars nursing their last drinks before heading home. The television in the corner played the evening news with the sound turned low, but everyone already knew what it would say. More fighting in the mountains. More young men leaving town. More families waiting for news that might never come. In the corner booth, away from the dim light of the main bar area, sat a young soldier. He couldn't have been more than 22, maybe 23 years old. His uniform was dusty and wrinkled, like he had been traveling for days. The name tag on his chest was too far away for Maya to read, but she could see the exhaustion written across his face. He had ordered a simple meal an hour ago. Meat stew with bread and a single beer. Maya had watched him eat slowly, taking small bites like someone who hadn't had a proper meal in a long time. Now the plate sat empty in front of him, and the beer bottle was still half full. He just stared at it, lost in his own thoughts. Maya had seen plenty of soldiers pass through the tavern over the past few months. Some were loud and boisterous, trying to forget whatever they had seen or done. Others were quiet and kept to themselves. This young man was different, though. There was something gentle about him, something that didn't quite fit with the hard edges of military life. She noticed him checking his watch every few minutes. Then he would look toward the door, then back at his watch. It was the nervous behavior of someone who knew they had to leave but didn't want to face what came next. Finally, he stood up and walked to the bar. Maya could see him better now under the overhead lights. He was tall and thin, with dark hair that needed cutting and kind eyes that looked older than his years. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out a worn leather wallet. "How much do I owe you?" he asked quietly. Maya punched the numbers into the old cash register. $18.50, she said. The soldier opened his wallet and Maya's heart sank. Inside were 3 crumpled $5 bills and some loose coins. He counted them out on the bar counter, his hands shaking slightly. $5, $10, $15. Then he counted the coins. 65, 70, 75 cents. He was short by almost $3. Maya watched as the color drained from his face. He counted the money again, hoping somehow the numbers would change. They didn't. He looked up at Maya with embarrassment and shame written all over his young features. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I thought I had enough. I can wash dishes or sweep floors to make up the difference. I know you probably think I'm some kind of con artist, but I promise I'm good for it." Maya felt something twist in her chest. Here was a young man who was probably risking his life for his country, and he was worried about washing dishes to pay for a simple meal. She thought about her own son, who would have been about the same age if he hadn't gotten sick when he was 12. She thought about all the mothers in town who lay awake at night wondering if their boys were hungry or cold or scared. Without saying a word, Maya reached across the bar and gently pushed the soldier's money back toward him. She shook her head and turned away, pretending to be busy with something behind the bar. She could feel his eyes on her, but she kept her back turned. "Ma'am," he said softly. Maya continued wiping down bottles that were already clean. She heard him clear his throat, trying to find the right words. "Ma'am, I can't let you do this. It's not right." Maya finally turned around, but she still didn't speak. She just looked at him with the kind of expression a mother gives a child who is trying to argue about something that has already been decided. The soldier stared back at her for a long moment, and she could see his eyes getting watery. He carefully put his money back in his wallet, but his hands were still shaking. This time, Maya realized it wasn't from nerves or embarrassment. It was from something deeper. Gratitude, maybe. Or just the simple relief of human kindness when you least expect it. "Thank you," he whispered, and Maya could barely hear him over the low hum of the television. She nodded once, just a small movement of her head, and went back to her cleaning. The soldier stood there for another moment like he wanted to say something else. But what do you say to someone who has just shown you unexpected grace? Sometimes words only make things smaller. He picked up his military bag from beside the booth and slung it over his shoulder. Maya watched out of the corner of her eye as he walked toward the door. Just before he reached it, he stopped and turned back. "My name is David," he said, "and I won't forget this." Maya smiled for the first time all evening, but she still didn't speak. David gave her a small salute. Not the formal military kind, but the casual gesture of respect that said more than any words could. Then he pushed through the door and disappeared into the night. Maya stood alone behind the bar, listening to the sound of his footsteps fade away down the empty street. She looked at the $18.50 in the cash register drawer, then at her own tip jar beside it. Without hesitation, she took the money from her tips and put it in the register to cover David's meal. Outside, she could hear the distant rumble of trucks on the highway, probably carrying more soldiers to wherever soldiers go when the fighting never seems to end. She thought about David walking alone through the dark streets, heading back to whatever base or barracks or battlefield was waiting for him. Maya finished cleaning up the tavern and turned off most of the lights. As she climbed the narrow stairs to her small apartment above the bar, she felt good about what she had done. It was such a simple thing, really. $18.50. But sometimes the smallest gestures create the biggest ripples. She had no way of knowing that this simple act of kindness would change everything. She had no way of knowing that by morning, her quiet little world would be turned upside down. All she knew was that somewhere out there, a young soldier named David was a little less hungry and a little less alone. And sometimes, Maya thought as she finally settled into bed, that's enough. Maya woke up to a sound that made her blood turn cold. It was 5 a.m, and she had only been asleep for about 4 hours. But this wasn't the gentle sound of early morning birds or the familiar rumble of delivery trucks that usually woke her up. This was different. This was the deep mechanical growling of something much bigger and much more dangerous. She sat up in bed, her heart already racing. The sound was getting louder, closer. It reminded her of the documentaries she had seen about wars in faraway places, but this wasn't on television. This was right outside her window. Maya threw on her robe and rushed to the small window that looked out over the town square. What she saw made her legs feel weak. 3 massive tanks were rolling down Main Street, their metal tracks grinding against the asphalt. Behind them came trucks filled with soldiers, but not the kind of soldiers she was used to seeing. These soldiers wore different uniforms, darker colors with patches she didn't recognize. Their faces were hard and serious, and they moved with the kind of practiced efficiency that comes from doing the same thing many times before. This wasn't a training exercise or a parade. This was an occupation. Maya watched in horror as the tanks positioned themselves around the town square. One stopped right in front of the bank, another blocked the road leading to the highway, and the third positioned itself near the small police station. The soldiers jumped out of their trucks and immediately began setting up barriers and checkpoints. Her hand shook as she reached for her phone to call someone, anyone. But then she realized she didn't know who to call. The local police? They were probably already dealing with whatever this was. Her brother in the next town over? The phone lines might be cut or monitored. Maya pressed her face against the window glass, trying to understand what was happening. Down below, she could see her neighbors starting to emerge from their houses. Mrs. Rodriguez from the flower shop stood on her front porch in her nightgown, staring at the tanks with the same shocked expression that Maya probably had on her own face. Then Maya saw something that made her stomach drop. 2 soldiers were walking up to Mrs. Rodriguez's house. One of them was carrying a clipboard, and the other had his hand resting on his weapon. Not threatening exactly, but ready. They climbed the steps to her porch and began asking her questions. Maya couldn't hear what they were saying from her window, but she could see Mrs. Rodriguez's body language. The elderly woman was scared. Her hands were shaking just like David's hands had been shaking the night before when he counted his money. But this was a different kind of shaking. This was fear. The soldiers questioned Mrs. Rodriguez for about 5 minutes, checking things off on their clipboard. Then they moved to the next house and the next. They were going door to door, systematically working their way down the street. Maya realized with growing dread that they would eventually reach the tavern. She quickly got dressed, pulling on jeans and a simple sweater. Her mind was racing, trying to make sense of what was happening. Was this some kind of military exercise? Had there been an attack somewhere? Was the fighting from the mountains finally reaching their small town? As she brushed her teeth, Maya tried to remember everything she could about the news reports from the past few weeks. There had been talk of rebel groups in the region, but that always seemed like something happening far away. There had been mentions of border disputes and political tensions, but again, those were problems for politicians and generals, not for small-town bartenders. Maya made her way downstairs to the tavern, moving quietly, even though she knew there was no point in trying to hide. The soldiers would find everyone eventually. The main room of the tavern looked different in the early morning light streaming through the windows. Everything seemed the same, but somehow felt changed forever. She made herself a cup of coffee with hands that wouldn't stop trembling. As she waited for it to brew, she found herself thinking about David. Where was he now? Was he safe? Was he part of whatever was happening, or was he caught up in it just like everyone else? The coffee was bitter and too strong, but it helped calm her nerves a little. Maya sat at one of the tables near the window where she could watch what was happening outside. More soldiers had arrived, and now there were checkpoints at both ends of Main Street. No one was getting in or out of town without permission. She watched as Mr. Thompson, who ran the hardware store, tried to drive his pickup truck out of town, probably heading to his usual early morning supply run. The soldiers at the checkpoint stopped him, checked his papers, and searched his truck. After about 15 minutes, they let him through, but Maya could see the worry on his face as he drove away. The systematic door-to-door questioning continued. Maya counted the houses and calculated that the soldiers would reach the tavern in about an hour. She tried to think of anything in the building that might seem suspicious or problematic. There wasn't much. Just the usual supplies for running a bar, some old paperwork, and her personal belongings upstairs. But then she remembered the conversation she had overheard the week before. 3 men had been sitting at the corner table, talking quietly about routes through the mountains and supply shipments. At the time, Maya had assumed they were talking about legitimate business, maybe logging or mining operations. Now she wondered if there had been more to it. She also thought about the various customers who had passed through the tavern recently. Some of them had been soldiers like David, but others had been harder to identify. Men who paid in cash, who didn't talk much, who seemed to be traveling through town rather than living there. At the time, Maya had been grateful for any business. Now she worried about what those men might have been doing. The sound of boots on gravel made Maya look up from her coffee. 2 soldiers were walking toward the tavern. They looked young, maybe not much older than David, but their faces were serious and professional. One carried the same kind of clipboard that Maya had seen with the other teams. Maya stood up and smoothed down her sweater, trying to look calm and cooperative. She unlocked the front door and waited. The soldiers knocked firmly but politely. "Good morning, ma'am," said the taller of the 2 soldiers. "We're conducting routine security checks in the area. We need to ask you a few questions and take a look around your establishment." "Of course," Maya replied, surprised that her voice sounded steadier than she felt. "Please come in." The soldiers entered the tavern and looked around carefully. The one with the clipboard began asking questions. Name, age, how long she had lived in town, what kind of business she ran. Standard information, nothing threatening, but Maya could feel them studying her, watching her reactions, looking for signs of nervousness or deception. "Have you noticed any unusual activity in the area recently?" the soldier asked. "People you don't recognize, strange vehicles, conversations that seemed out of place." Maya thought about David, about his obvious lack of money and the way he had been so grateful for her small kindness. She thought about the men who had been discussing mountain routes. She thought about all the soldiers and travelers who had passed through her tavern in recent weeks. "No," she said simply, "just the usual customers." But even as she said it, Maya realized that her definition of usual had changed dramatically overnight. And she had a sinking feeling that her simple act of kindness the night before had just become much more complicated than she ever could have imagined. The 2 soldiers spent nearly an hour going through the tavern. They checked every room, every closet, every corner where someone might hide something. Maya followed them around, answering their questions and trying to stay calm. Her heart was beating so fast she was sure they could hear it. They looked through the storage room behind the kitchen where Maya kept extra bottles and supplies. They examined the small office where she did her paperwork. They even went upstairs to her apartment, checking her bedroom, bathroom, and the tiny living room where she watched television in the evenings. The soldiers were polite but thorough. They didn't break anything or make a mess, but they touched everything. Maya watched them flip through her personal photo albums, check inside her medicine cabinet, and look under her bed. It felt like being examined under a microscope. "Everything seems to be in order here," the taller soldier finally said as they came back downstairs. "We may need to come back for follow-up questions, but for now you're free to continue your normal activities." "What's happening?" Maya asked as they headed toward the door. "Why are there tanks in the street?" The soldier paused and looked at her carefully. "There's been some trouble in the region. We're here to maintain order and protect the civilian population. As long as everyone cooperates, there won't be any problems." After they left, Maya locked the door behind them and sat down heavily in one of the chairs. Her legs felt like jelly, and her hands were still shaking. She had passed their inspection, but something about the way the taller soldier had looked at her made her uncomfortable. It was like he was filing away information about her for later use. The next few days settled into a strange new routine. The tanks remained in the town square and soldiers patrolled the streets regularly. People could still go about their business, but everything felt different. Conversations were quieter. People looked over their shoulders more often. The cheerful morning greetings between neighbors became nervous nods. Maya reopened the tavern the second day after the occupation began. She wasn't sure if anyone would come, but by evening, several of her regular customers had shown up. They needed somewhere to sit and talk, to try to make sense of what was happening to their town. "My cousin in Millfield says the same thing happened there 3 weeks ago," said Jack, an older man who worked at the grain elevator. "Tanks rolled in overnight, soldiers everywhere. But nothing bad happened. They just stayed for a while and then left." "What were they looking for?" asked Lisa, who taught at the elementary school. "Nobody knows for sure," Jack replied. "But there were rumors about weapons being smuggled through the area. Maybe drugs." The soldiers questioned a lot of people, but most folks were left alone. Maya listened to these conversations while she served drinks and cleaned tables. Everyone had theories about why the soldiers were there, but nobody really knew anything for certain. The uncertainty was almost worse than the truth might have been. On the third day, something happened that changed everything for Maya. She was closing up the tavern around 10 o'clock when she heard a soft knocking at the back door. Not the front entrance that customers used, but the service door that led to the alley behind the building. Maya froze. Nobody ever used that door except for delivery trucks, and those only came during the day. The knocking came again, 3 soft taps followed by 2 harder ones. It sounded like some kind of signal. Maya approached the door quietly and looked through the small window. In the dim light from the alley street lamp, she could see a figure in dark clothing. The person was looking around nervously, checking to make sure nobody was watching. "Who is it?" Maya whispered through the door. "It's Mrs. Chen from the flower shop," came the reply. "I need to talk to you." "It's important." Maya knew Mrs. Chen, but only slightly. She was a quiet woman in her 60s who had moved to town about 2 years ago. She ran a small flower shop near the post office and kept to herself most of the time. Maya had always wondered what had brought her to their little town, but she had never asked. Maya unlocked the door and let Mrs. Chen inside. The older woman looked around nervously before speaking. "We need to talk," Mrs. Chen said quietly. "But not here. Too many windows, too many ways for people to see or hear us." She led Maya to the storage room in the back of the tavern, where thick walls and no windows provided more privacy. Mrs. Chen sat down on a stack of beer cases and motioned for Maya to do the same. "I know what you did 3 nights ago," Mrs. Chen began. "With the young soldier, David." Maya's heart stopped. "I don't know what you mean." "You paid for his meal when he didn't have enough money," Mrs. Chen continued. "You didn't say anything about it, but you helped him anyway." Maya stared at the older woman, wondering how she could possibly know about that. Had Mrs. Chen been watching the tavern? Had someone else seen what happened and told her? "That young man is special," Mrs. Chen said. "He's not just any soldier. He's part of a group that's trying to help people in this region, good people who are fighting against some very bad things that have been happening." Maya felt her mouth go dry. What kind of bad things? Mrs. Chen was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "There are people who want to control this area for their own purposes. They don't care about the families who live here or the businesses that have been here for generations. They only care about power and money. And David is fighting against them? David and others like him, yes. But it's dangerous work, and they need help from ordinary people like you and me. People who can provide safe places to rest or food or information about what the other side is doing." Maya felt like the room was spinning. This was way beyond anything she had ever imagined when she pushed David's money back across the bar counter. She had just been trying to help a hungry young man. Now Mrs. Chen was talking about resistance groups and dangerous enemies. "Why are you telling me this?" Maya asked. "Because you've already helped," Mrs. Chen replied. "Whether you meant to or not, you're already part of this. The soldiers who searched your tavern weren't just doing routine checks. They were looking for evidence that you had helped David or others like him." Maya remembered the way the taller soldier had looked at her, like he was studying her face for signs of deception. Had they suspected her all along? "There are others in town who are helping too," Mrs. Chen continued. "People you would never suspect. The librarian, the mechanic who fixes cars, the woman who runs the bakery. We've been working together quietly for months, helping people escape from areas where the fighting is bad, providing supplies and information." "What do you want from me?" Maya asked, though she was afraid she already knew the answer. Mrs. Chen reached into her jacket and pulled out a small piece of paper. "David is safe for now, but there are others who need help. Tomorrow night, someone will come to your back door. They'll knock the same way I did tonight. 3 soft knocks, then 2 harder ones. If you're willing to help, let them in. If not, just ignore the knocking." Maya took the paper with trembling hands. On it was written a single word: freedom. "Think about it," Mrs. Chen said as she stood up to leave. "But don't think too long. People are counting on us." After Mrs. Chen left through the back door, Maya sat alone in the storage room for a long time, staring at the piece of paper in her hands. 3 days ago, her biggest worry had been whether she would have enough customers to pay the electric bill. Now she was being asked to join some kind of underground resistance movement. Maya thought about David and the gratitude in his eyes when she had helped him. She thought about the tanks in the town square and the fear in her neighbors' faces. She thought about what kind of person she wanted to be when the world around her was changing so quickly. By the time she finally went upstairs to bed, Maya had made her decision. Tomorrow night she would be listening for 3 soft knocks followed by 2 harder ones. Maya barely slept that night. Every sound outside her window made her jump. The piece of paper with the word freedom written on it sat on her nightstand like a burning coal. She picked it up and put it down a dozen times, each time feeling the weight of the decision she had to make. By morning, she had dark circles under her eyes and her hands shook as she made coffee. The tavern felt different now that she knew the truth about what was happening in her town. Every table, every chair, every corner might soon become part of something much bigger than serving drinks and making conversation. The day passed slowly. Maya served her usual customers lunch and tried to act normal, but she found herself studying each person who walked through the door. Was the mailman part of Mrs. Chen's network? What about the teenage boy who delivered groceries from the market? How many people in her small town were living double lives? Around 3 in the afternoon, 2 soldiers came into the tavern. Not the same ones who had searched the place, but 2 different men. They ordered coffee and sat at a table near the window where they could watch the street. Maya brought them their drinks, her heart pounding so loud she was sure they could hear it. "Quiet town," one of the soldiers commented as Maya set down his cup. "Yes, it usually is," Maya replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "Must be nice," the other soldier said. "Peaceful places like this are rare these days." Maya nodded and went back behind the bar, but she could feel their eyes on her. They stayed for almost 2 hours, drinking coffee and watching everything that happened outside. Maya wondered if they were there because of her, or if this was just routine surveillance. When they finally left, Maya felt like she could breathe again, but their presence had made one thing clear: she was definitely being watched. Whatever decision she made about helping Mrs. Chen's network, it would have to be very careful. Evening came too quickly. Maya closed the tavern at her usual time, but instead of going upstairs to her apartment, she stayed downstairs in the main room. She turned off most of the lights but left one small lamp burning near the bar. Then she sat in a chair where she could see both the front door and the back exit. 9 o'clock passed, then 10. Maya began to wonder if Mrs. Chen had been wrong, or if something had happened to whoever was supposed to come. Maybe the soldiers had caught them. Maybe the whole network had been discovered. At 10:30, Maya heard it. 3 soft knocks at the back door followed by 2 harder ones. The signal Mrs. Chen had told her about. Maya's heart started racing again, but this time it wasn't just from fear. It was from the realization that she was about to cross a line she could never uncross. She walked to the back door and looked through the small window. In the alley stood a woman she had never seen before. She was young, maybe in her late 20s, with short brown hair and wearing dark clothes. She looked tired and scared, and she kept glancing over her shoulder like someone might be following her. Maya took a deep breath and opened the door. "Are you Maya?" the woman whispered. "Yes, Mrs. Chen sent me. My name is Rebecca. Can I come in?" Maya stepped aside and let Rebecca into the tavern. The young woman moved quickly to the storage room, clearly knowing where to go. Maya followed her and closed the door behind them. "Thank you for helping," Rebecca said quietly. "I know this is dangerous for you." "What kind of help do you need?" Maya asked. Rebecca sat down on the same stack of beer cases where Mrs. Chen had sat the night before. "I need a place to stay for 2 days, maybe 3. And I need to send a message to some people in the next county." "What kind of message?" "Information about troop movements. How many soldiers are in town, where they're positioned, what kind of equipment they have. There are families trying to get out of the danger zones, and they need to know which routes are safe." Maya felt a chill run down her spine. This was real. This wasn't just about helping one hungry soldier anymore. This was about gathering military intelligence and helping people escape. If she got caught doing this, she wouldn't just get questioned and released. She would disappear. "The soldiers have been watching me," Maya said. "2 of them sat in my tavern for hours today, just watching everything." Rebecca nodded grimly. "They're watching everyone who had contact with our people. Mrs. Chen told me about the soldier you helped 3 nights ago, David. He made it to safety, by the way. Your kindness probably saved his life." Maya felt a mixture of relief and terror. David was safe, but now she was in deeper than ever. "I have a basement," Maya said suddenly. "It's not much, just a small room where I store wine and extra supplies. But it's completely hidden. The soldiers searched the whole building and never found it." Rebecca's eyes lit up. "Can you show me?" Maya led her through the kitchen to a door that looked like a broom closet. But when she opened it, instead of cleaning supplies, there was a narrow staircase leading down. At the bottom was a small room with stone walls and no windows. Maya had inherited it with the building and mostly used it to store things she didn't need very often. "This is perfect," Rebecca whispered, looking around the small space. "How did the soldiers miss this?" "The door is hidden behind a false wall," Maya explained. "The previous owner was paranoid about burglars. He built this room to hide valuables. I only found it by accident when I was repairing the kitchen wall last year." Maya brought down some blankets and a pillow from upstairs, along with some food and bottled water. Rebecca settled into the hidden room like someone who had been living this way for a long time. "How long have you been doing this?" Maya asked. 6 months, Rebecca replied. "Ever since they took over my hometown. My husband was a teacher there. They arrested him for having the wrong books in his classroom. I haven't seen him since." Maya felt her heart break a little. Rebecca wasn't much younger than she was, and she was fighting this dangerous battle all alone, trying to find her husband and help other people at the same time. "What about your family? Your parents?" "Gone," Rebecca said simply. "The fighting reached our area early. I'm pretty much on my own now, except for people like Mrs. Chen and hopefully you." Maya sat down on an old wooden crate and looked at this brave young woman who had lost everything, but was still trying to help others. She thought about her own comfortable life, her safe little tavern, her predictable routine that had been turned upside down just a few days ago. "What do you need me to do?" Maya asked. Rebecca smiled for the first time since she had arrived. "Just keep acting normal. Serve your customers, clean your tables, pretend nothing has changed. If anyone asks about strange noises or lights, you don't know anything about anything. And the message you need to send? I'll write it tomorrow. All you have to do is give it to Mrs. Chen when she comes to buy flowers. She'll know what to do with it." Maya nodded, feeling like she was stepping off a cliff into empty air. But for the first time since the tanks had rolled into town, she felt like she was doing something that mattered, something that her son would have been proud of if he had lived to see this day. "Rebecca," Maya said as she prepared to go back upstairs, "are we going to win this thing?" Rebecca was quiet for a moment, arranging her blankets in the dim light of the basement room. "I don't know," she said honestly, "but I know we're going to try, and sometimes that's enough." 2 days passed without any problems. Maya served customers during the day and brought food down to Rebecca at night. The young woman stayed hidden in the basement, writing her message and resting. Maya had almost started to believe that everything might work out smoothly when disaster struck on the 3rd night. It was just past midnight when Maya heard the sound that made her blood freeze. Heavy boots on the stairs leading to her apartment. Not one person, but several. They were trying to be quiet, but in the old building, every footstep echoed. Maya sat up in bed, her heart hammering against her ribs. Through her thin apartment walls, she could hear whispered voices and the soft click of weapons being checked. They had come for her. She grabbed her robe and quickly tiptoed to the window. Down in the alley behind the tavern, she could see more soldiers positioned near the back door. They had surrounded the building. There was no way out. The knocking came at her front door, firm and authoritative. Maya took a deep breath, said a quick prayer for Rebecca hidden in the basement below, and went to answer it. 3 soldiers stood in her doorway, led by the same tall officer who had questioned her on the first day of the occupation. His face was grim and professional, but Maya could see something else in his eyes. Suspicion, maybe even certainty. "Maya Rodriguez," he said, reading from a paper in his hands. "You need to come with us for questioning." "What's this about?" Maya asked, trying to sound confused rather than terrified. "We have reason to believe you've been harboring enemies of the state," the officer replied. "Get dressed. We're leaving in 5 minutes." Maya nodded and went back into her bedroom to change clothes. Her hands shook so badly she could barely button her shirt. She thought about Rebecca sleeping in the basement just 20 feet below where the soldiers were standing. If they searched the building again and found the hidden room, Rebecca would be caught. And Maya knew that this time there would be no polite questioning and release. As she pulled on her shoes, Maya made a decision that surprised even her. She was going to protect Rebecca no matter what it cost. The soldiers escorted Maya out through the front door of the tavern. As they walked toward their military vehicle, Maya looked back at her building one last time. The windows were dark and everything looked normal. She hoped Rebecca would stay hidden until it was safe to leave. They drove Maya to a building on the edge of town that used to be a small medical clinic. Now it had been converted into some kind of temporary headquarters for the occupying forces. Maya was taken to a small room with 1 table, 2 chairs, and a single bright light hanging from the ceiling. The tall officer sat across from her and opened a thick folder. "Your full name is Maya Elena Rodriguez. You're 38 years old. Born in this town, never married, no children. You've owned and operated the Crossroads Tavern for 12 years. Is all of this correct?" "Yes," Maya replied. 3 nights ago, you served a meal to a young man identifying himself as David Martinez. He was unable to pay his full bill, and you covered the difference from your own money. Is this correct?" Maya's stomach dropped. They knew everything. "I helped a customer who was short on money. That's not a crime." "David Martinez is not his real name," the officer continued. "His actual name is David Restrepo, and he's a member of a terrorist organization that has been conducting illegal activities in this region." Maya stared at the officer, trying to process what he was saying. David, the polite young man who had been so grateful for her kindness, was labeled a terrorist by these people. But Maya had looked into his eyes that night. Whatever David was fighting for, it wasn't terrorism. It was something else entirely. "I didn't know any of that," Maya said. "He seemed like a nice young man who was hungry. I would have done the same thing for anyone." The officer studied her face carefully. "We have surveillance footage of him leaving your tavern that night. We also have reports that someone matching your description was seen talking to Mrs. Chen Liu, who runs the flower shop. Mrs. Chen is also a person of interest in our investigation." Maya's heart sank. They had been watching everyone, recording everything. How long had they known about the network? How many people were in danger? "Mrs. Chen is my neighbor," Maya said. "We talk sometimes, about flowers and the weather. Normal things." "Where's David Restrepo now?" the officer asked. "I have no idea. I haven't seen him since that night." The questioning continued for hours. The same questions over and over, asked in different ways. Maya stuck to her story. She had helped a hungry customer. She talked to her neighbors about normal things. She didn't know anything about any resistance movement or terrorist activities, but Maya could see that the officer didn't believe her. He kept looking at his papers and frowning, like he had information that contradicted what she was saying. Finally, around dawn, a younger soldier came into the room and whispered something in the officer's ear. The officer's expression changed, and he looked at Maya with what might have been disappointment. "You're free to go," he said. "For now. But don't leave town. We may have more questions for you." Maya was driven back to the tavern in the same military vehicle. As they pulled up in front of her building, she could see that other soldiers had been there while she was gone. The front door was open, and there were signs that the place had been searched again, more thoroughly this time. Maya walked through her tavern, seeing overturned furniture and open drawers. The soldiers had torn the place apart looking for evidence. But as she made her way to the kitchen, Maya felt a surge of hope. The false wall that hid the entrance to the basement looked untouched. She waited until she was sure the soldiers were gone, then carefully opened the hidden door and went down to the basement. Rebecca was there, awake and alert, sitting in the corner with a worried expression. "I heard vehicles and voices all night," Rebecca whispered. "What happened?" Maya told her about the arrest and questioning. As she spoke, she could see the fear growing in Rebecca's eyes. "They know about the network," Rebecca said. "We have to assume everyone is compromised, Mrs. Chen, David, all of us. What do we do now?" Rebecca stood up and began gathering her few possessions. "I have to leave tonight. Every minute I stay here puts you in more danger." "Where will you go?" "There are other safe houses. Other people who help. The network is bigger than just this town." Rebecca paused and looked at Maya with gratitude and sadness. "You saved my life by hiding me here. I won't forget that." Maya helped Rebecca prepare to leave. As the sun set on what had been the longest day of Maya's life, she walked the young woman to the back door of the tavern. "Will I ever see you again?" Maya asked. Rebecca smiled, but it was a sad smile. "Maybe. When this is all over, when people don't have to hide anymore, maybe we'll meet again under better circumstances." They hugged briefly, and then Rebecca slipped out into the alley and disappeared into the darkness. Maya locked the door and went back upstairs to her apartment. The place was a mess from the search, but she didn't have the energy to clean it up. She sat on her bed and looked out the window at the town square, where the tanks still sat like sleeping metal beasts. Everything had changed. Her simple life was gone forever. But as Maya thought about David's grateful eyes and Rebecca's brave determination, she realized that she had discovered something about herself that she never knew existed. She had found the courage to do what was right even when it was dangerous. Maya didn't know what tomorrow would bring. She didn't know if the resistance would succeed or fail. She didn't know if she would ever see David or Rebecca again. But she knew one thing for certain. She had made the right choice. And sometimes that's all any of us can do.